As everybody here tonight knows, this is the Marianist Retreat and Conference Center. And one of the founders of the Marianist family is Blessed Father William Joseph Chaminade. That is, I guess, what he used to look like. I don't know. One of the things that Father Chaminade offers us is a way to grow closer to God and closer to one another through what he called the system of virtues. And within this system, he developed what he calls the 5 silences. Now, I'm going to list them, but you don't need to remember them because I'm only going to talk about one tonight, but I want to set kind of a framework. The 5 silences are the silence of words, the silence of imagination, the silence of the passions, the silence of the mind, and the silence of signs. Last month, Jen Duncan, right there, she spoke on the silence of words, which is, I don't know, kind of ironic to speak about the silence of words. And you can hear her talk on our Marianist Retreat and Conference Center YouTube channel if you were not here last month. I'm going to speak tonight briefly about the silence of the imagination, and heads up, next month, a former board member and lay Marianist, Maureen Hoke, is going to speak on the silence of the mind. But tonight, silence of the imagination. Now, the role of these 5 silences, more than anything, is trying, with God's help and grace, to place ourselves totally and fully into God's presence by quieting ourselves. We did that a little bit in our worship tonight, right? Kind of quieting ourselves, entering into God's presence, and allowing ourselves to be present to God, who is always present to us. Here's what Father Chaminade had to say about the silence of the imagination. He said, it grieves me to know that you allow difficulties and contradictions to overcome you. What we need is self-possession and the control of our imagination. What Father Chaminade is talking about when he talks about control of our imagination is what our culture today calls mindfulness. To be mindful of our imagination is to be aware that our imagination can be a tremendous source of inspiration, and our imagination can be a tremendous source of distraction from what's really important in life. So think about the positive aspects of our imagination. Through our imagination, we can place ourselves in biblical situations, like imagine ourselves being at the wedding feast of Cana in Galilee, or imagining ourselves being with Jesus when he suffers on the cross. I mean, consider any of the mysteries of the Rosary and imagine yourself in those places and in those times with Jesus and Mary. Our imagination can be expanded in really healthy ways by reading good books, watching movies, and immersing ourselves in music and in art. And yet, I suspect all of us have experienced, I know I have, that our imagination can blow problems out of proportion and immobilize us in fear. Think about, you don't have to say it out loud, but think about a time when your imagination was not your friend. A couple examples from my life. When I was a kid and my dad was late coming home from work, and these were the days before cell phones, my imagination would take me to really bad places, assuming he was in an accident when he was only stuck in traffic. As a teen, my imagination took me to dark places, wondering if any girl would ever be interested in me. And it made me sad to focus on everything that I didn't like about myself. I'm really not that hideous. Why are you laughing? Even now, with someone I love who has cancer, I can allow my imagination to take me to a really dark place, wondering what life will be like when she's gone, instead of enjoying every moment that I have with her. We need the grace of God to help us silence the dark and distracting aspects of our imagination. And I'd like to close this Marianist moment with a couple brief ideas of some things that help me when I lean into them, but they don't help me when I don't. One thing that really helps is talking it out with somebody that I trust. When my imagination is going crazy, to talk it out. And I have friends who'll call me out and say, yo, whoa, settle down, right? Let's think about what's really important here. Let's talk about the truth. That's one thing. Another thing is I try to remember the wisdom of a spiritual director who said, and this was in terms of worrying about the future. Your imagination can go crazy about what might happen in the future. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when we worry about what might happen in the future, our worry is usually worse than what actually happens, even if what happens is bad. But the spiritual director encouraged me and said, that is not where you're at right now. So that is not your concern right now. Don't even concern yourself with it. I thought that was really wise. Another thing that really helps is this quote. This is from a book called Abandonment to Divine Providence. Maybe just close your eyes and listen to this. No soul can be really nourished, fortified, purified, enriched, and sanctified, except in fulfilling the duties of the present moment. That's where we get fed. That's where we experience peace. Fulfilling the duties of the present moment. Another thing that has helped is a simple but powerful 5-word prayer. Jesus, I trust in you. Another thing that's really helped me is committing everything to the care of Our Lady, especially through my favorite prayer called the Memorare. That anything we entrust to Mary's care is going to be okay. And it always is, isn't it? And finally, biblical truth helps me to silence my imagination when I lean into biblical truth. There's a verse so powerful. Now remember, we're talking about silence of the imagination, which doesn't mean shutting our imagination down. It means focusing our imagination on the things that we should. There's this verse from Ephesians 3:20, which talks about how God's power working within us can do incredibly more than we could ever ask for or imagine. Hear that word, imagine? God's power working within us can do incredibly more. One verse, or one translation of the scripture says that God's power working within us can do infinitely more than we could ever ask for or imagine. If we could just use our imagination to have our hearts wide open to God, I think it would make all the difference. Stay tuned for next week when we hear about silence of the mind.